Hello, guys, and welcome back to the show today. And today I want to talk about muscle relaxers. I had a great conversation with a client on my table the other day, and he was on muscle relaxers. And it was interesting. He talked about how he thought with what I was doing in providing more movement in his joints, that the muscle relaxers that he was taking should be more beneficial. And I wanted to dig more into that research, and I thought this would make a great show. So today's show is going to be about understanding these muscle relaxers and how well they do work for tightness, stiffness, and soreness. Now, this is a closer look at what the data tells us, and I want you guys to understand that the absence of pain is not the best predictor of movement health. Now, muscle relaxers are one of the things that your doctor will prescribe when you feel tight, stiff, sore, or if you have any symptoms of pain. And the logic, we think, when we get that prescription is that when we take this pill, our muscles are going to relax. But that's not what the research tells us, not at least what I found in the research. Now, in today's show, I want to break down what muscle relaxers do, and if the outcomes that you think you're going to get from taking these pills will give you what you think you want. Now, when you take a muscle relaxer, you most likely assume that this pill is going to relax your muscles so that it improves your pain or tightness. And this assumption is the thought that is tightness a muscle problem, and is a muscle relaxer going to relax that muscle? And that single assumption is a little bit misleading from what I found in the data, because when you look closely at what these drugs do and what the research actually measures, well, it's a little different from what most of us believe when we actually take a muscle relaxer. And I've taken these pills before. When I was APTA, I transferred a lady who had tone, and when I went to transfer her, she went back into extension when she stood up, and that pulled me forward and it strained my SI joint. And I had to go in for treatments, and I had to take these muscle relaxers. And for me, everybody's body is a little bit different, but for me, I took one of them. I was traveling. I had traveled back home to family, and I took one, and somebody came to the door that was visiting us. And I recall that day like it was yesterday. It was sort of hilarious. I went to stand up from that chair, and I was like a little noodle walking around, and it sort of relaxed my entire body. Now, here's what the data tells us about how well muscle relaxers work for tightness, stiffness, soreness, and pain. And it leads to a bigger idea that changes how you may want to think about your own body when it comes to taking a muscle relaxer. But of course, guys, this is between you and your doctor, okay? Not me. I'm just giving you the data so that you can make the decision that is better for you. Now, if the absence of pain is not the predictor of movement health, then we need to learn a little bit more before we make a decision. So let's talk about what tightness actually is. So tightness is not a shortened muscle that needs to be lengthened. Tightness is actually a signal, and it begins at the joint. And when your joint actually loses loses movement. And that means that the space inside the capsule is restricting movement of the bone. Your nervous system it sort of inhibits the muscles around that joint, and then that causes a restriction or a guarding in the joint. And when you have that, when it's turned on that switch to restrict and guard the joint, then another cascade happens. And that's when your nervous system continues to read that it's unsafe. So it responds in a protective way. And this protection is good if we're living in life-altering situations. But in our current daily lives, it's not so good. And when the body restricts the joint, giving the bone very little functional space to move, it also causes other things to happen. And it's sort of like a light switch, okay? Our nervous system really only knows how to turn the light switch off. And when it switches off the muscular system that supports the joint, then everything just doesn't work the way that it's supposed to naturally work. And when the nervous system simply inhibits the muscular system, the same way you turn off that light switch, in the research, what they call this is arthrogenic muscle inhibition. I call this the silent shutdown cycle because it runs without you feeling a thing, and that's what makes it so dangerous for you. And once your joint locks down and the muscles are shut off from doing what they're supposed to naturally do, that bracing, well, that's the tightness that you feel. And you're probably thinking, well, it's no big deal because it really doesn't affect my day-to-day life. But here's what you don't understand. The nervous system never turns that light switch back on. So you're losing that joint space and the function of your muscles while they're switched off. And while it's turned off, your nervous system is controlling your movement. So now your movement is being controlled by a protective measure, which is your nervous system. And this nervous system really doesn't need to do that part. And if it has to be faced with moving your joints and turning off your muscles and restricting movement from you, then it's not going to be able to do the other jobs that it is supposed to do. And when it does stay in the role of protection too long, the damage that it causes in this cycle when it's active is that it starts building structure, which is bone spurring. And bone spurring forms in areas that load unevenly. And this is due to AMI. So even though you won't feel this process happening, it's happening. And one day it will be visual on imaging. And at this point, you actually have damage, pain, and more loss of joint space. You're going to feel that. You're going to be able to see that on imaging, which is narrowing of the joint space. Your tightness is information, and it's your body's pointing at a joint that no longer can move the bone that can no longer move inside the capsule. And if you use an analogy, it's like your body doesn't let the bone move, and when it shuts down and shuts off the muscular system, then that muscular system goes into decline. And I call both of these a decline, okay? It's a decline of movement health. Now, arthritis is the end of that destruction, and that is what AMI leaves behind for you. So let's with that information, let's discuss muscle relaxers a little bit more. So are muscle relaxers actually relaxing your muscle? And the common muscle relaxers don't act on the muscle at all based on the research that I found. And they're not designed to. They are centrally acting, which means they work in the brainstem and the spinal cord. And they turn down the overall signal of the traffic running through your entire nervous system. The loose, calm feeling that you feel is a sensation the nervous system sends you when you take this medication, but it's actually not your tight muscles being released or relaxed. It is your entire nervous system and movement system being affected. Now, a common side effect of muscle relaxers is drowsiness because it is signaling the entire system. And that's why I felt that noodle or that bendy feeling because, I had that sensation of full relaxation when I took a muscle relaxer. And I think the muscle relaxer I took was Flexeril. Now, the medication cannot target one muscle, okay? And it can't just identify the muscle that you need it to identify. The medication is going to lower the drive across your entire nervous system, and that drowsiness is a clue to what is really happening. The pill isn't finding the knot in your neck or your back or relaxing it. It's actually dialing down everything at once, and you're sensing that whole body sedation as relief. Now, It is systemic. It affects every muscle along with the ones that are inhibited and already switched off through AMI. And that process that is inhibiting those muscles, this is going to cause more muscle inhibition. Now, AMI already inhibited the signal through the cycle, and now this medication is going to take it further. And the pill and the original problem are going to push in the same direction. Meanwhile, the joint that started all of this is really never addressed. The bone is still not going to have the space to move. You're not going to have that movement in your joint. And all of this, the AMI, is the reason your body started guarding. Well, it's not addressed with the muscle relaxer at all. So let's take a closer look at the data. When you go looking into the research for evidence that muscle relaxers resolve tightness or restore movement, the data is very limited. National recommendations generally limit these drugs to about 3 weeks because they haven't been shown to work for muscle spasms beyond that window of time. And one of the epidemiologists who studies them stated plainly that muscle relaxants may be no more effective for pain than medications like Tylenol or Advil. And on the long term, there is very little to support the efficacy of muscle relaxers. Researchers note there are few studies on the short-term safety of these drugs and almost no data on their long-term effects. The concern I wanted to learn more about was the inhibition itself. And if you took a muscle relaxer and AMI already, is inhibiting your muscles and guarding and restricting your joint so that the bones don't move. If tightness is also driven by an inhibited muscular system, the obvious question is whether a muscle relaxer helps or is worse for that inhibition cycle. And I really wasn't able to find the research that supported muscle relaxers were helpful for this inhibition. Now, the interventions with evidence for waking an inhibited muscle are things like cryotherapy, electrical stimulations and targeted exercises. Guys, but these studies, they were shown to reverse large muscle inhibition, okay? They did not reverse the deep muscles that are turned off. So one part of the system is addressed while the other still goes unaddressed. Reversing inhibition requires an excitatory signal. It requires feedback that wakes the muscle up. The deep muscles are too deep to touch this with those type of treatments. In fact, a muscle relaxer is going to dampen the signal instead of exciting the signal. So by its own mechanism, it works against the very thing that would resolve your tightness. Now, recommendations generally cap these muscle relaxers, like I said above, in about 3 weeks because they haven't been shown to work beyond that time. And researchers report almost no data on the long-term effect. And in one analysis, they were not more effective than over-the-counter options like Tylenol. But let's dive a little deeper into the risk of taking muscle relaxers long-term because a lot of times you're chasing symptoms for a long amount of time. So these tend to be something that you take on a regular basis, thinking that you can actually overcome your tightness by taking these. And if you end up taking these medications for months or years, I want you to look into the side effects of doing so. Serious side effects documented in the research include, if you are older, the biggest thing is falls and fractures, vehicle crashes, abuse, dependence, and overdose. Now, when I talk about older adults, I'm talking about, your senior citizens that are already at fall risk. Most of those don't recommend these muscle relaxers as something that they should prescribe because it gives anticholinergic effect, and it increases the risk of falls and fractures in seniors. And prolonged use is also going to raise the risk of cognitive impairment. In one study of older patients that were given muscle relaxants for pain after surgery, 1 in 8 were still filling the prescription 3 months later, far beyond the window these were ever meant for. So the long-term trade-off is a drug with limited proven benefit and almost no long-term data, and a growing list of risks that get heavier with age. So my concerns were pretty proven. Tightness does not improve with taking this medication. And when tightness goes unresolved, the cycle underneath, called the silent shutdown cycle, which is AMI, arthrogenic muscle inhibition, it's going to keep running. Your joints are going to load unevenly to the loss of centration, due to the loss of centration in that, and you're not going to have the deep muscle support that you're supposed to have. And when this happens, bone is a living tissue and it remodels based on the load that travels through it. So a joint that loads unevenly for a prolonged amount of time is going to build extra bone where the load concentrates. This is going to cause your cartilage to wear unevenly. Your joint space is going to narrow, bone spurs form at the margins, and those changes are what we define as osteoarthritis on a scan. Now that's the real path of unaddressed tightness. It is the silent decline, and by the time it finally shows up as pain, you have a bigger problem to deal with, which is that destructive osteoarthritis at the end of the path. So I want you to hold two things side by side here. Tightness is an early signal of the silent shutdown cycle. It is the signal I want you to better understand, and I want you to use that instead of pain. A muscle relaxer is going to quiet the signal to the muscle systemically through your nervous system, while the cycle of inhibition from AMI is going to continue until you see a structural change on imaging. Now, let's talk about why the absence of pain is not the best predictor of movement health. When we've been trained to wait for pain because we can seek care from the doctor after pain is present, pain is sort of that alarm that we trust, and that is what we do to decide to act. But tightness is going to precede pain. And in the research, the people who reported higher muscle tension were the ones who went on to develop pain. Tightness is going to precede pain, and pain precedes disability. So tightness is the earliest moment that is going to be a better way for us to understand if we can catch this silent decline. This is why the absence of pain is not the best predictor of movement health. You can feel no pain and you can still have AMI stealing your joint mobility and your muscle function. And the joint can be restricted and the muscle system can be switched off long before you feel any type of symptom or warning that is pain. Now, when a muscle relaxer mutes the early signal of tightness, it doesn't stop the cycle. It removes your ability to notice it. You're going to feel calmer, so you assume the problem is stopped, and it is not. It will keep running while you are not paying attention. And this is how people end up surprised by pain years later, and they end up on that surgical table begging for a hip replacement because they were measuring relief the entire time instead of measuring healthy movement. Pain is a late signal, and by the time your nervous system is already building bone and damage, you will not know it's happening. The early signals that you can use more precisely are tightness, stiffness, and soreness. And if you experience any of those, that is a sign to get yourself tested. Identify what joints you have movement remaining in. And if you don't have available movement in those joints, then you need to restore that movement as quickly as possible. And then you need to turn the muscles back on. And that is what's going to give you more functional space for the bone to move so that that protective mechanism doesn't have to stay in control of your movement. Now, here's a better way also to measure movement health. If you wake up one day and you have tightness, you have soreness, you have stiffness, and you didn't do anything to cause it, it just happened out of the blue, that is the silent shutdown cycle. And that's when you need to get tested, and that's when you need to address it and restore it. And that's going to be your quickest way of preserving your healthy movement. Now, if you work out at the gym and you have tightness after you work out, tightness is your signal that you were loading unevenly, and that is going to actually cause that uneven loading to advance to structural change. So you want to use, if you're working out, if you have tightness afterwards, that's not lactic acid, and that you don't need to recover from that. That is a signal that you need to get in and get tested. And that's the difference between waiting for pain and ending up on a surgical table to get a hip replacement, because you can identify this a lot sooner. We have the tools to be able to test and identify how much space in your joints you've lost, how much movement you've lost. We have the tools to be able to see compensation and to see if the movement is coming from a different area but should be coming from your hips or your thoracic spine. We have all of that. And I can actually identify and test and see this cycle and teach you when this cycle is starting. And then we can restore your movement so that you can continue to have healthy movement. And I'm going to give you a number that scores it. I'm going to be able to show you, which joints have lost movement. And then I'm going to be able to restore movement health in each of those joints, and then teach you how to activate those dormant muscles and understand when they are inhibited again. I'm going to be able to show you all of that when you come in to see me and you work with me. And then I'm going to give you a number that represents if you are, if your movement is healthy or if it's in decline or accelerated decline. This is also going to help you better understand how and where you are and how much movement you have to use on a daily basis. This is going to help you to stop guessing whether what you are doing right now is working or not working. Bottom line is, if you take a muscle relaxer, know exactly what you're getting. You're getting a disruptive signal for a little while. It's not addressing or answering, resolving, or preserving your healthy movement. And there's nothing wrong with wanting relief, and those decisions belong between you and your healthcare provider. This is simply information so that you have a clear picture, so that you can think about your own body and have the information you need so that you can make the choices that work for you. If you want to address your joint and the loss of movement in the joint, and you want to get your joints tested, I have two different ways of doing that. And I do virtual and in-person sessions. Now, my virtual sessions and my in-person sessions, I have a unlock healthy joint mobility intro session. And that's going to be a taste of what I do in my studio. It's going to be one area in your body. I'm going to give you a mobility health score. That health score is going to tell you which joints have actually lost movement and how limited that movement is, and then where it's placing force that is causing your tightness, stiffness, or soreness. Now, I also have a larger test that tests your entire movement system, and that is the Healthy Movement Test. Now, that test is $399, and you're going to be, and it is only in the office, and you're going to be in the office about an hour. I'm going to look at your movement to see if you have compensation, to see if the movement is coming from places that it shouldn't. And then I'm going to test all the joints in your body to see how much movement has been lost and then what muscles have been inhibited. And then I'm going to give you recommendations on what you can do to reverse and restore that so that you can maintain your healthy movement. Now, those people who are looking to get a discounted exam, that exam's about 45 minutes. You're going to get a taste, a mobility health score in just one area only. And then I'm going to restore some movement in the joints of that area so that you can feel it. I'm going to show you a couple of activation things. You're going to better understand what is going on in that particular area. And then I am going to be able to tell you if I am able to help you or what you need to do to be able to reverse, restore, and preserve your healthy movement. So if that's something that you're interested in, please look below and I'll put something in the notes so that you can schedule either of those. If I forget to put it in the notes, then please feel free to contact the office at 513-874-8800, or you can always email us at info@thestretchmobilitycoach.com. Guys, thanks so much for joining me today. I appreciate it, and I hope this information was helpful for you so that you can make choices that's going to keep your movement healthy. See you next week.